So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
It's crimeworld at sundayworld.com.
It is.
For your questions, if you want them answered or addressed here in this such a highbrow intellectual forum that we run.
Yeah, big time.
Isn't it?
It's only the best for the best.
Are you actually, have you been accepted into Mensa?
I haven't. I wouldn't.
Have you not?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. It's a bit below me.
It's
yeah, it would be. Yeah,
it's very high.
unless I was to be given a position of authority, I wouldn't bother joining.
Okay, so why do, this questioner wants to know, the media always have to reiterate that Liam Byrne is, quotes, not involved in crime, end quotes?
Well, like a lot of journalism.
It's a bugbear of mine anyway, so I'm very glad somebody's asked this.
Well, as long as I've been in journalism, one of journalists' favourite things to do is blame the lawyers. So, if we have any
Thomas
lawyers...
and Fergus, big shout out to you guys.
If they're legaling this, journalists always like to say, oh, that was the lawyers. I didn't want to do that. So there's two reasons, right? Firstly, Liam Byrne is not involved in crime. Because of the fact that we're speaking about his father, who is involved in crime, we're just making it clear that this is, although we're speaking about his father, we're not speaking about him.
We actually wouldn't be interested in him as an individual or influencer or whatever he is if he wasn't part of the Byrne family, and so sort of...
Well, we might now be interested in him. Like, he has become an influencer.
You and I wouldn't be interested in that.
We wouldn't. But the newspapers in general...
Show busy people.
Well, the newspapers in general might cover him. But so it's to be fair to him to say, any mention of criminality in this story is nothing to do with the fact that
It's sort of, because he only ever comes up for us when we're talking about his father, we're talking about his grandfather, we're talking about his uncle, or we're talking about other members of his extended family. And it's always to do with organised crime, because unfortunately he is by birth born into a sort of a multi-generational familial crime family.
Yeah. And so, but it is funny, and obviously it becomes repetitive. Didn't somebody used to say, I thought Matthew Macklin's middle name was not involved in crime?
Yeah. And it was the same thing there, wasn't it, of course? Because
Matthew Macklin was obviously a talented boxer who had opened up a business with Daniel Kinahan, at the time known as MGM, that ultimately became MTK. Matthew Macklin was a professional boxer. That was a very, he wasn't involved in crime again. But when we were speaking about him in the context of his friendship with Daniel Kinahan, we had to keep saying that, and people then used to sort of joke that
Matthew,
it was...
I'm not involved.
Or who's not involved in crime, Macklin.
Macklin, yeah.
So it is a bit repetitive.
Yes, but it's something we have to do, and it is a legal thing, just to keep somebody's reputation intact. We don't want to be the ones that would damage somebody's reputation when they aren't involved in crime. And it's just... Yeah, it's an irritation.
It's clear that there's not an implication, and there isn't an implication on either of those two people, Liam Byrne or Matthew Macklin. They aren't involved in crime. They're, it's in Liam Byrne's case, his father is,
Somebody has sent in, speaking of Byrne, this question: do you think Liam Byrne is an informer?
Some of this has come out on online, I suppose. Mostly because the fact that he really received quite a lenient sentence, or people perceive it to be quite a lenient sentence. He was given a 5-year sentence, but effectively served less than 2 years, isn't it? Ultimately, some of it on remand, and walked free just a couple of months after being convicted. When that happens to people involved in criminality, particularly at the level that Liam Byrne is involved or was involved in, it always leads to this suggestion that they are informers and they've done a deal and that's why they got out. Personally, I don't see it. I think there was reasons why he was treated relatively leniently by the courts in the UK. While
I think do you know what?
Yeah.
Like, you see, I think sentencing is almost a science, right?
Yeah.
And it's a mathematical thing that people generally don't look beyond the kind of the headline sentence that somebody's getting and when they're due out and why is everything cut and why aren't they serving that full time? Why are they out in license? All the rest of it. But actually the judge in that case that sentenced Liam Byrne, Thomas Kavanagh and Sean Kent and the others that were involved explained himself extremely well as regards what he had in front of him. So Liam Byrne got lucky.
Yeah.
Because he was arrested in Spain along with Jack Kavanagh, who is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh's son, okay? And they were both arrested, placed into custody in Spain, and they sort of fought their extradition back to the UK on these charges, which related to guns, which had been bought up by the Kavanagh Byrne organisation, were buried in Newry and which Thomas Kavanagh wanted to give over to the NCA in the hopes that he would get a shorter sentence. He was at the time facing that big, hefty 21-year sentence that he ultimately got for trafficking a huge amount of cocaine into the UK. But when it came to the sentencing, there was, firstly, Byrne was returned to the UK, but the bigger charge that would have maybe got him a couple of extra years had he pleaded to it or had he been found guilty of it, couldn't be placed because the Spanish law didn't have that. And that was the perverting the course of justice, which was the most serious of the charges that he would have faced. So he got lucky that he was arrested in Spain and the extradition wouldn't allow that.
Yeah.
So therefore he was basically up for his role in it, which was he was caught on the phones trying to gather the weapons and being part of this plot.
Yeah.
Now, the weapons were deemed as, under the sentencing, they weren't weapons that were going to be used for crime, even though it was quite weird to consider that.
Yeah.
They were buried to be handed back to the cops. And that was considered.
That was considered. So it wasn't as if they were importing these weapons for use on the streets.
Yeah.
For either, murder or for any of those. They were literally imported to be given straight back.
To be given straight back. So that had to be considered, even though that was the actual crime they were committing by doing that. And obviously Byrne and others also pleaded guilty, which is the big thing. That's really going to chop up the sentence. So they start and the judges usually say, right, well, this is the region of a sentence you could get. And maybe with Byrne, from memory, it might have started at about 8 years. And then he starts chopping that back because you pleaded guilty, because you did this, because these guns weren't to be used, et cetera, et cetera. They come down to this 5 years. Now, Liam Byrne had spent, can't remember, but well over 100, maybe 300 days in custody or something.
Yeah.
Possibly a full year in custody between Spain while he was fighting the extradition and the UK. And all that time in Spanish jail was considered as being part of that he'd already served that time. Yeah. So he got his 5 years. You do usually, 2/3 of that or something, the rest out on license. Some of it will be suspended. Some of it has already been served. And Byrne got lucky again because the prisons in the UK are completely overcrowded.
They are.
And the government decided that they were going to open the doors and let out many's one who was nearing the end of their sentence.
And of course, Liam Byrne hasn't had any convictions in 2 decades effectively, and that was also taken into account. Now, obviously he's not been a good boy for the last 2 decades, but when you look at it in a court, that reputation and even the Criminal Assets Bureau cases, for example, they weren't taken into account. What was taken into account was what was there in black and white in terms of criminal convictions. I don't personally think he's an informer. Who's the informing to? I suppose you'd have to go back. Like, he obviously wasn't informing to the NCA.
No.
Because that didn't feature in part of the case. Is he informing to the guards? Well, I mean, the guards have certainly absolutely targeted him as best as they can.
Yeah.
So who else is left to inform to international
I don't
police forces? So
an informer. And I think what Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, his brother-in-law, did, and I think what they all got involved in, which was the handing back of the weapons to the police and sort of getting into bed as such with the police, is something that is a very murky waters for people involved in organised crime. And obviously at the head, neck and tail of this is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who is not able to do his time, clearly, and will do anything to get himself off or not have to serve, including, and the others maybe look down on him on this, for bringing his own son into it and getting his own son a criminal conviction. That wouldn't be necessarily what a lot of criminals would believe to be okay behaviour.
Look, these guys at the very top, I mean, certainly traditionally, right? And like, I could definitely know this and believe this to be true. At the very top level in Dublin, those top tier criminals, they weren't informers in the sense that we think of it, where, there's the CHIS system, what is it? Covert handling information system, or whatever it's called, where, you actually have a handler and you get 200 quid a week or whatever, and you give a bit of info. But definitely those top layer, they'd have interactions with the Gardaí all the time. And they'd have, maybe if there was threats against them, or they'd be stopped when they were seen and all. And they used to throw out a few little tidbits about their enemies, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that may well still go on. It wouldn't be any statement or any handler.
It could be steering.
So they were always at that.
They're always going to do that because they
always at
it's
that.
basically like if the Gardaí or the specialist units aren't on them, they can go about their business. But if they can steer them over to some other grouping, of course, it means that they can go about their business and someone else is feeling the heat.
And the poor young fellas, who the 18, 19-year-olds would be no commenting and, fuck off, I'm not saying anything to you, guard.
Yeah.
But the guys up the top would be, why are you bothering with me? Sure, your man down the road, he's got this going on. And, And
you know what? I do know of some very well-known criminals whose names would be known who are informers.
But on the system.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think so high risk. The same sort of rumours go round about them, but in a way there's safety in numbers, isn't there? Because, anybody who gets off or gets lucky is called an informer. And the more people being called an informer, the less it devalues it as an insult, exactly, or as an activity. But definitely, look, informing is where it's all at.
Yeah.
It just happens all the time, and a lot of, and most of, certainly the high end, police work we talk about is all because of informants.
Yeah.
Have given specific information.
Yeah.
Like, the guards do not go around watching known criminals and following them 24/7 in the hopes that they might do something. That's not the way it works.
No.
The way it works is intelligence is gathered, sometimes through bugging devices or hacks or whatever, but more often than not through human intelligent resources who will give them a piece of information which will allow them make a decision on when to move in on a consignment of drugs or weapons in order to get as many people as hands-on as possible.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're the one that's been caught, lifted, you're going to be going, who the hell ratted on me?
And they're always going to say it's on the phones, but they're not sitting there listening on phones either 24 hours a day. They don't have the resources to that. So they listen strategically, but they're not just sitting on
keywords and all that.
Well, or periods of time.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one that we always get asked, but it's an interesting one. So how close are the likes of Mr. Flashy and Mr. Big to being charged and named? And there's a few questions about Mr. Big and Mr. Flashy and names.
Okay.
But
I was going to say that I think that Mr. Big's in a bit of trouble.
Yes.
I think he is the subject of a lot of attention at the moment by Gardaí. And I think that they are circling him in the way that you see them circling those big fish prior to a takedown. Yes. He has made himself very prominent. His activities and particularly his connections that he's made across the country and north of the border have made him, his name is there
not just in the Garda, I think it's fair to say in international police force attention as well. So that's another degree of peril that he's facing.
Big time. And we've seen a number of activities around investigations that, he's the centre of, including there's been some Garda raids on properties connected to him.
There has. And
some of those raids appear to be connected to looking for detail around encrypted phone messages.
Because what we know about, as we've seen in the UK, it's not just enough to have the encrypted messages. They have to connect that with an individual. So is that what's happening with Mr. Big? Are they trying to connect encrypted handles with messages, with details of,
Undoubtedly, that is happening now. Obviously, in this jurisdiction, we have not pursued EncroChat cases. So they have to be conducting that kind of investigation for somebody from a different jurisdiction. Of course, we know that Big's name has been around the murder of Robbie Lawler for a long time. If anybody's interested in that and hasn't heard it so far, if you go onto our Crime World Presents channel, you'll find an 8-part podcast about the murder of Robbie Lawler called Double Cross. And within that, Mr. Big's, the suspicions around Mr. Big's involvement are there. Of course, he was one of the first names in the ether after Lawler was killed in April 2020. He was killed days after the EncroChat phone hack went live. A fascinating time. But yeah, I think that he's not too far from something.
If you look at what we do know about his network, it's certainly, in the absence of the Kinahan cartel, like he has a footprint all over the place, but it's particularly in through Leinster and through the north of Ireland. Now, we know people that were living on the border. They've come before the courts, people that grew up with Mr. Big that are originally from Dublin. We've heard evidence in court about their use of EncroChat phones. That's played a big feature in prosecutions being brought against them. So, we know other people from the Republic, drug dealers. We've heard of EncroChat devices being used by them. They also have associations with Mr. Big. So, what's on those encrypted phones? And how, even if there are things on them, how can they be used in a court setting? Well, that's the big question.
And of course, if the man we know as Mr. Big is charged, the reporting around that will name his real name, but won't associate him with Mr. Big until a point if and when he's convicted. And at that point, the media would be in a position to obviously join the dots for those who already haven't done that themselves, because I find most people out there kind of know.
But I think what you can say about Mr. Big is he's not misnamed. Like, he is a major, major criminal, and he really is at the centre of a web.
And he spent a lot of time building his independent network.
Well, he is Mr. Flashy. If in terms of media coverage, like, he's probably not as, he might also have as much media coverage per article as Mr. Big, but he really is a totally different ball game. I mean, he is really a very regional phenomenon who was involved in very, very serious criminality, and certainly made it big at a young age, I suppose you could say. But he simply wasn't in control of an organisation that would be equivalent to Mr. Big. His days, I think, are he's also very much the target of Gardaí operations. Whether the most serious of the crimes he's been connected with are the immediate target, I don't know that they are. But I think the days of Mr. Flashy being regarded in the same sentence even as Mr. Big, I think they're past.
And just what can we say about Flashy? Age, range?
Well, we can say that he's in his 20s, that he's from Finglas, from North Dublin, and that he was a very much an out-of-control criminal, and he had a network of people around him that were involved in in murders, in particular the murder of James Whelan. But, without that kind of mentorship of the Kinahan cartel, who have really cut him loose at this stage, he slips back into being not quite a nobody, but certainly not somebody that if he was behind bars can continue to control a massive network or
somebody that those, that others would take on.
Yes,
they mightn't take him on with the weight of the Kinahan cartel behind him, but without them, he certainly will be.
It's interesting to see the contrast because the Mr. Big operation is a totally different ballgame.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see how, ultimately you can see how he was able to control really a national network of crime bosses, really, who all ultimately were answering to him. Flashy is a flash in the pan, I suppose, relative to that.
I like this one, so let's go for this, right? Why do the Gardaí seem so far behind in crime crackdown compared to the NCA?
Well, I don't know that they are actually. I saw that question and I thought that, but I tell you what, the NCA are way better at publicity, aren't they?
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. The NCA, which is the National Crime Agency, so they are the UK police that we see a lot of information coming from. I mean, we've used quite a few of their videos on our own social media channels. They tend to investigate a criminal organisation. They've had a lot of success because of EncroChat, haven't they? I mean, they've been doing a huge amount of targeted sort of investigations through all of that, and the information that comes to light during the court cases is super interesting. Yeah. It's a real deep dive into these organisations. But what they are so good at is a press pack.
Yeah, a press pack. And I even saw one today. I don't know if you saw it. I sent it to you of a Liverpool couple.
Okay.
But they didn't just, so they send out great mugshots. Yeah. Don't just send out your man, who's the main player. They send out a picture of his girlfriend, who was also convicted, in fairness, like sort of glamorous influencer type. Huge detail. Put it all together and put it out. The guards, it's just not their tradition.
Oh my God.
Now, it has to be said,
they're getting a bit better.
They have improved. And the Criminal Assets Bureau in particular.
The Criminal Assets Bureau are great. Yeah. And they are brilliant at their social media. They're brilliant at alerting people to what's going on. Look, there's a proceeds of crime list that's heard in the courts once a month. And Eamon Dillon goes down and covers that. And he knows what he's kind of looking for. He knows the cases that are out. And he comes in and he tells us all about these court cases that the Criminal Assets Bureau are doing. Their proceeds of crime. But in the meantime, they kind of are coming to the end of other investigations. And only recently I was out in Stefan Saunders' house, which they had seized. And we got to go in and have a look. Yeah. And why not? I think it's a fantastic bit of media relations because the public want to see that. I mean, the Gardaí are a state-funded organisation. Everybody in the Gardaí are paid by taxpayers' money. And it's really good to see what it is they're doing with that. And that money from the Criminal Assets Bureau in particular, those houses and everything, when they're sold, that money goes straight back into the state coffers.
And also, it is a deterrent for a criminal. They don't want to be the feature of a press release where the inside of their home is out.
Or a Nicola Talent, at home with
Nicola. No, you don't want
You don't want me traipsing around your house.
No, you don't. So it is a deterrent.
Yeah.
So the guards, I mean, in fairness, the guards have moved hugely.
Well, no. Let's not go that far.
But the region...
They haven't moved hugely.
No.
I mean, look, no harm to those people behind making it, but have you seen Crime Call?
Well, I mean, even that is a bit more lively. And also, look,
watch it.
I don't tend to watch it. I have to say. I mean, no. I mean, we do stories on it sometimes, and I see clips actually.
Yeah. I feel it's sort of lacking a sophistication or something, and I don't know.
But they have, I suppose if you look at Inside the K, or I think it became just...
Well, that was fabulous.
Guards. And I mean, I know the guards...
Totally different program, though. I mean, that's a documentary that's made a fly-on-the-wall style over a period. Like, this is... The Crime Call, as far as I know, it's made by an independent production for RTE, but the Gardaí cooperate with it completely. I mean, they put forward the people that are going to go on to talk and everything. And you just sometimes wonder, where is the media training? Where is the concept behind trying to engage the public in this stuff? Now, having said that, I've watched it. It's bubblegummy. But... you could do something so much better with it. The NCA themselves have their own in-house. They make fantastic videos.
They do, and they do a podcast. And the guards are now also doing a podcast. So I mean, look, they are making those steps forward, but yeah,
I didn't know the guards were making a podcast.
They are. They are. Well, they interview various people.
Various of the guards.
No, well, of course. I mean, it's a professional journalist that does it, and look, of course, it is by its nature. It's not people slagging each other off about Botox and turning 50 and stuff, but no, I mean, they are. Yeah. But I mean, it is. Look, the world keeps changing. And I do think there are progressive forces, but sometimes the guards are a really, really inherently conservative organisation, aren't they?
Well, and as well, they now have an inherently conservative commissioner at the helm of it. Somebody who has come from the north of Ireland, from all those years that we probably look on now as what the hell was going on there between collusion and everything else. And he was at the heart of that organisation and was hired to come down to Ireland, to the Republic, to rule and to change the organisation of the Garda Síochána, which needed change. Nobody's going to claim it didn't. But there has been that regulatory conservatism has really been hammered home, I think, within the organisation under his control. And that sort of that secrets thing, the non-cooperation of the various units among themselves, I think that all goes back to his door. Even my bugbear, the EncroChat, he was the commissioner in charge at that time when it was decided that they would pretend, that they believed that no criminals used EncroChat phones and that they had seen and heard nothing. They would just keep all that information in a couple of drawers in a certain, in crime and intelligence and not pass it on as they did in the UK to the Gardaí on the ground. I mean, the NCA, you look at them, all you have to do is go onto their web and you will see the amount of mopping up they've done from EncroChat, the amount of amazing cases they have taken, successful prosecutions, the amount of guilty pleas because the evidence has just been so strong against people, and the amount of organised crime groups they've dismantled as a result of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually to see in the guards, like there's different units have are more media savvy, I'd say. I mean, the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, if you get a press release, they'll often have a quote at the end from one of the commission or the assistant commissioners or
and we're used
senior
to seeing them on interviews and in documentaries, and they sometimes provide some of their senior people to documentaries.
Exactly, and so you see that, but then if there's a murder down in one of the regional, down the countryside somewhere, you'll see this. This attempt almost not to have it in the paper nearly. So you can see that in the world of social media where you simply can't control that flow of information, it just doesn't work anymore because if the guards don't fill it up and give out information, it just gets filled up with nonsense.
Exactly,
nonsense.
yeah. And where does all the money that the Gardaí find during raids go?
Well, I think it goes into the state coffers.
It does, of course.
I don't know exactly how it goes.
Well, I think
the more interesting thing is what do they do with all the drugs, and they tend to
burn them, don't they?
They tend to burn them, yeah. And we've asked a couple of times.
A few people out there cry. But the money and stuff like that, what happens with the money, as far as I know, is that you can claim the money back, but you have to prove how you earned it, basically.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, these raids are focused on organised crime groups where, there isn't a legitimate business to trace some of the cash that's discovered. Obviously, the weapons and the drugs are kept because they're illegal. But certainly the money and sometimes those luxury items, you're given a particular amount of time to claim them, but you have to put a case forward. It is up to you to prove that you legitimately earn the money to allow you to afford to buy your Louis Vuitton collection of handbags, etc., etc. That's what the CAB is, the Criminal Assets Bureau, and that's the strength of it, because the onus is on the individual being targeted to prove rather than on the guards themselves.
But we did ask at one point, can we go? I can't remember what. I think it was one of those seizures of a couple of £100 million, or probably off one of the the ships. And
Oh, yeah?
I got one of our reporters to send an email, can we go and watch it being burnt? But they wouldn't let us.
No, because you'd probably end up high as a kite.
No. But you know what I mean?
I'm sure it has to be, sorry, I'm sure
no, I'm sure it's not
burnt properly.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Wouldn't
You know, they're not,
around as high as kites.
they're not presumably not throwing it.
It's cancelled yet again.
They're presumably not throwing it in the fireplace in the local Garda station, all right. But yeah. So here's another one. Who was your best interview that you've done? Or if not the best, the most memorable?
My nephew, who's 12, asks me these questions all the time. Like, what is your favourite colour? It's just such,
Yeah.
I don't know. I never know I don't even know what my favourite colour is. Yeah. What is my best interview I've done?
Well, what is the one that sticks in your head the most?
Well, I mean, you could ask me that at different points in my career and I'd tell you a different one. I mean, clearly at the moment, the most significant interview done over the recent months was with the monk.
Yeah.
Yeah?
100%.
And obviously, if you had have asked me the question before that interview was done, I probably would have come up with, I don't know, any amount of people that stick out as being good interviews. Now, having said that, a lot of those sort of what I would describe as interviews with the criminal kingpins are usually me trying to talk to them and then them telling me to talk to you. Fuck off. I'm not 100% sure that goes down.
Let's qualify it as an interview for our purposes.
Yeah, and we are simple souls. But
I mean, the funniest one, the one that always sticks in my mind is an interview that I did with a woman called Anne-Marie Brazillo, who we talked about the other day. I mean, she's passed away now. I'd done a couple of stories with her. She was somebody who'd had a very, very tough life, had a lot of abuse in her past as a young woman, spent a lot of time in psychiatric institutions, but also basically spent her whole life in prison. And I'd known her over the years and done a couple of stories. I mean, she was, one of these, a chronic drug problem. But in another world, she could have been somebody working.
She was engaging and interesting and funny and
smart and intelligent.
Yeah.
Nothing lacking in that way.
Yeah.
And I've met other people like that.
Yeah.
That, you'd have a good laugh with them.
Yeah.
Now, it was absolute chaos. Like I've told you before about the time she landed in here. She'd got out of hospital. She'd been in hospital. I don't even know what it was for. And she'd obviously done a runner from hospital because she still had the thing in her arm. The drip in her arm. And even I think she was getting some blood transfusion. So she'd taken the metal thing down.
The whole...
And she used to call into me and, I've got a brilliant story for you about this person or that person. It's great. And I'd be like, oh, jeez.
Yeah.
But, eventually I'd say, okay. And then when she did turn up, she would have no story at all and just hit me for
20 quid.
At best.
Yeah.
So I remember popping down from the hospital in her jammies and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, she was a sight to behold at that stage. Yeah. But ultimately, she rang me up one Saturday.
Yeah.
And we'd actually been looking into a story about a guy who'd been killed, basically beaten to death. Was a murder investigation at that point was launched. And she rang me up and said, I'm after killing somebody.
Oh.
I didn't mean to do it now.
Right.
But I killed somebody last night.
She finally had a story.
She had a story. And I'll never forget that because she just told her what happened. And,
right.
There'd been not to get into the specifics of it, but there'd been a struggle and she'd killed him.
Yeah.
She didn't intend to kill him. She intended to fight him off effectively. And she died and she wasn't a murderer. And I said, look, this is going to be on the record. She said, no problem. She posed her pictures. I said, we're recording this now. I'm not going to...
Yeah.
I'm putting this down. This is on the record. No problem. I just want people to know that I'm not some sort of murderer.
Right.
He just killed him. He fell basically and died.
Okay.
And I'll just never forget that.
It's just not every day. I mean,
no, it's not every day.
You're on that subject.
I mean, that was he died that night.
Yeah.
And that was Saturday morning.
So these were her reflections the next morning.
Well, it was, yeah.
While you're on that subject, of course, we are going to be live for the Cork Podcast Festival in the Opera House on March 30th. Tickets are from corkpodcastfestival.ie. And we're actually going to be speaking about all this.
Yeah.
We're going to call our show Look Who's Talking.
Yeah.
And we're going to be showing clips and talking about how we get talking to criminals, how that comes about, what they want to say, sometimes what their agenda is, a lot of the stuff that we have never published and never could publish, and why.
Yeah.
We're going to go around a lot of that sort of stuff because I think people are interested in that. People are interested in the nuts and bolts of it all, aren't they? They like knowing, what you think of somebody when you're face to face with them, but it's actually the getting there.
It is.
And how does this come about that I think they are also finding.
And it's a funny interaction, of course, that criminals have with the papers because, ultimately, the criminals read the Sunday World. Like, they're not reading the Financial Times for the most part. Maybe Christy Kinahan is. Yeah. But they have a love-hate relationship, don't they, with the newspapers?
Oh, yeah, with journalists, they definitely do.
Yeah.
But I think things are changing. And I think we will, we'll go through that and how things are changing, why they're changing, and why all of a sudden we're going to be living very shortly in a world where everybody has their own narrative.
They do.
And where it'll become more and more common.
Yes.
That you will see people whose name you only ever heard of or saw in headlines around organised crime will be speaking.
And you see it on TikTok.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a new wave of people who are about to go to prison who are doing daily TikToks as they lead up to that point.
Yeah.
Some of them genuinely sincere or sound sincere.
Yeah.
The old rules are being smashed every month.
That's it. In the same as in the overworld or whatever you'd call it, as the underworld, everything is changing very, very rapidly. And we're going to have a little look at all that. Okay, well, look, keep the questions coming in. It's crimeworldpodcast@sundayworld.com. And we will keep you up to date with these Q&As, which kind of cover a bit of everything, don't they?
They do.
And of course, what our listeners and our viewers really want us to talk about.
Thanks very much, Nicola. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.